Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to ISACA Sri Lanka chapter's webinar on internal audit functions and navigating expectations and value. So before we proceed with the webinar, I'd like to give you all a brief about ISACA Sri Lanka chapter. So ISACA, which was previously known as the Information Systems Audit and Control Association, is basically a worldwide association of IS security and governance professionals, which started back in 19. And the association currently focuses on assurance, security, privacy, and governance, and provides global certifications in these areas. So when we come to the ISACA Sri Lanka chapter, we've been in existence in 1996, and we have over 250 members just in Sri Lanka. And our basic aim is to support local seminars, workshops. We conduct regular chapter meetings, and we help to promote and elevate the visibility of information systems audit, control, security, and the privacy profession throughout the country. We've got quite a few active members in the chapter, and we also have a few student chapters with us, which includes UCSC, NSBM, SLIT, and the University of California. So without further ado, let me take you all to today's event. Like I said before, it's today's webinar is on internal audit function, navigating expectations and value. It'll be done by none other than two very prominent female personalities in the information audit and security space. We have with us Ms. Sonali Wickremaratne, the Global Head of Internal Audit, Virtusa. Sonali is a proven leader with over 17 years of experience from the renowned public corporations in the US, India, and Sri Lanka. She's been working with CXOs for over 11 plus years and has been a US board member for over 6 years. When you talk about her experience, my gosh, might take the whole day. She's a veteran when it comes to internal auditing, risk management, compliance for US-based public companies, public filings, and is very well versed with producing holistic process reviews. In information technology, financial processes, regulatory compliance, mergers and acquisitions, you name it all, she's a veteran. So her global role here at Virtusa has basically garnered her Virtusa's Hall of Fame award for leadership as well. Along with Sonali, we have another resource personnel, Ms. Anjana Wijegunasinghe, the Senior Manager for Digital Assurance Solutions, Group Internal Audit, DP World UAE. Anjana is an internal audit, risk, and governance professional with over 20 years of experience in various industries. She's currently heading the, like I said before, the Digital Assurance Solutions section within the Group Internal Audit Department of Dubai Port World. And as most of you all might know her, she's been part of our webinars before. Her vision is to drive smart audits through simple data and digital solutions. She's been recognized thoroughly for the initiatives within the internal audit space throughout her career. She considers herself an innovator in her profession and likes to redesign and redefine what internal audit is and what internal audit can do. So without taking more of your time, I'd like to hand over the controls to Ms. Wickremaratne to start the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilushi, and a warm welcome to all who joined us today. Thank you so much for your participation. I'm going to flash the slides momentarily. Nilusha, are
We
you
can see
able
your
to
slide.
see the?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
All good.
I'm unable to see myself, so because I'm flashing the slides, is there a way to adjust that? No, right? Okay, so let's get started. Again, thank you very much for everyone's participation today. What we're going to do today is to speak about a few aspects that actually increase the internal audit's value. And these are some subtle points that typically get overlooked as we actually dive ourselves into the finer details of controls and risks, instead of threading a bigger picture together to understand how we all fit into a larger puzzle in the company's strategy and the expectations of the C-suite. So as we navigate in how to actually augment the value of an internal audit department, let's start by understanding the expectations of the C-suite. And when I say C-suite, I mean all of the CXOs, whether you work with the chief financial officer, the chief executive officer, or the chief information officer, the information security officer, whoever crosses your path. There is going to be some form of C-suite that interacts with you at the level of the audits, the results, or even requesting for certain audits. A lot of the conversations that typically take place are based on the type of audits that you'll need to do or the type of risks. But there are some subtle points that are never communicated. But these are unspoken expectations that the C-suite has with internal audit as they work through them. So based on my experience in working with various C-level individuals, as well as board of directors and audit committees, what I have put together here is a list of things that are the unspoken expectations of the C-suite. We'll go through some of them now. And please do tell me, as I can't see anything else since I'm presenting, if you'll have any difficulties seeing the slides. So we'll start with show some strength. So this is the unspoken expectation of the C-suite, particularly when it comes to the chief audit executive and those who interact with them. Right, so there may be some doubt at times, and as well as some thoughts thinking, should we be very, party to what they think? Should we hold back unpopular thoughts and ideas? Although it may come across like they would like for you to actually be party to what they think, the respect of the C-suite comes from when you actually bring in an authentic, honest perspective, and that you are comfortable with unpopular opinions. Because that's the role, but it's the way that you pitch it that you need to change. And I think that's where typically the difficulty comes in. People think that they need to be party to what other people think, instead of understanding how to assertively communicate and present an unpopular opinion and assume the discomfort that it brings in certain leadership positions. One of the main things when it comes to interacting with C-level and when you actually get into those types of positions, whether you're a chief audit executive, a director, or any of the senior positions, is the ability to cultivate that energy and the acceptance that some thoughts and opinions may not be agreed on. But to find a way to make sure that you express it and ensure that the company benefits from what's between the two parties. Either way, respect and the expectation comes from ensuring that strength is shown when you're in those positions. The second point is to be a strategist. Most of the time, what happens in internal audits, and if you even take the junior resources, they're not aware or well aware of how they fit into the puzzle. Sometimes even the chief audit executive may not be aware. So it is really important, and the C-level expects this, that you are well aligned to the company's short-term goals and the long-term goals. When I say short-term, there has to be a view of the 5-year journey. Typically, People measure themselves in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, so forth, right? So it's really important to understand what is the company's 5-year vision? How is our risk assessment fitting into this vision? Are we looking at things that is really not strategic here? And that puzzle has to be well figured out. And that only comes up when the top level of the department, such as the chief audit executive or the directors, continuously engage in wholesome and meaningful conversations with the C-suite. That also requires the C-suite to be very transparent with their plans. And if they're not transparent, I suggest you'll ask. You can ask your CFO, you can ask your CIO, what is your 5-year plan? And is our annual plan fitting well into the strategy? Because oftentimes there are disjointed conversations. A fraud happens or a security incident happens, or there's a big platform change, and that becomes the focus of the audit. It's also important to pause and understand, while this becomes the focus of the audit, is this an intentional effort that we want to do a one-off, or is this fitting well into the grand scheme of things? Because you want the energy and the efforts of your department to be in line with the vision of the overall company so that the results you're bringing in is value adding to the overall direction. So there's a lot of synergy. It's not disjointed. So that's one part of it. And this may also, being a strategist, at times I see difficulties arising, particularly if an internal audit department is entirely outsourced. There are situations, particularly sometimes in Sri Lanka, sometimes outside of Sri Lanka, where internal audit departments are outsourced to a consulting company, the Big Four or any of those companies that would do the job for them. Sometimes being outside of the company, they may lose that strategic direction. So it's always important for the partners or for the leadership to ensure that strategic direction is well aligned with your department's vision, and how that flows together has to be well connected. The third unspoken expectation here is to be a catalyst for change. So when you actually audit, you will start seeing where the difficulties of the company really are. And you would start to see where the silos are, because a lot of people tend to work in these disjointed little units without coming together. And as internal audit, one of the unspoken expectations is not only to churn out an observation that is related to the risks, but to go one step beyond and say we need to fix these larger problems. Sometimes that may not be directly related to the risk as well, so that the entire company can work in a synergy that increases the efficacy of what we're trying to do here. So that you are a contributor to the operational efficiencies of the company as well. And a way of accomplishing this is to ensure that one is to identify the silos when you audit. The second is to ensure that you actually engage with people to understand the changing dynamics of the company. One of the things that we do is, particularly in my organization, we have a connect once in 2 weeks with all the controllers, the financial controllers, the FP&A folks. And this is a good casual exchange that takes place on what's going on in everyone's world. And a lot of things are picked up in this meeting in the direction. On top of it, there is constant communication with the CIO, as well as the individual who engages in changing the system platforms for the company. Between these constant communications, we are able to identify what's going on, and particularly internal audit being an independent body, I get the opportunity to see, okay, there is a system platform change going on, which is a large effort, but I don't see finance actually giving that energy required to support that. Okay, so I need to actually pick this up and help people to understand. So I picked that up in the next meeting and I said, I see this, how can you all work together? So sometimes that independence allows you to see things differently. And that perspective at times need to be brought into the C-suite to have that transparent conversation of the synergies that are not used in the company. And that's an expectation, particularly when it comes to chief audit executive. Moving on from this point, insight is the next big expectation that the C-suite has and often not discussed. Most of the time, internal audit reports focuses on risk and the related issue and the recommendation. I always push my team and everyone who works with me to ensure that not only we provide those aspects, that we provide very deep insight from our root causes, right? Let's take an example. Let's say that you are auditing you're auditing a project, and one of your goals and a risk is to ensure that the project timelines are met within budget. This is a hypothetical example. And let's say your observation is that the project timelines were breached and the budget was, exceeded by about 25%. Now, instead of stopping there, you would go deep into the root causes. Why did this happen? And that's when the insight starts coming. That's when the company can come down to a point of making a paradigm shift. So when you actually go down to that insight level of why did this happen, you may unravel a whole series of problems. Now, in a similar situation, when we went down that path, one thing we found out was that budget was not augmented sufficiently to bring in additional staff to source the project. You go down deeper, you find even more problems that run deep, and one of them could be that well-being of employees were not addressed in the heart of a tough project that increased attrition, thereby dropped the ability to meet timelines. Now the root cause is far from the original risk, and there is employee well-being sprouting as an emerging problem, right? So that's the insight that is hidden behind some of the surface, and that also needs to be brought in. And that is an expectation because internal audit has this very unique ability to tie things together and have a very different view from those who actually engage in their day-to-day job responsibilities, because they don't get a chance to step away from their job and see the big picture as we do. And another thing is, once you go down that path of understanding what's the insight behind this and what's the root cause, and where is the depth of the issue? If you change that, then a lot of things in the company can change. You can also go and look at how the industry has responded to it. So for example, when you look at industry examples, you can look at how the Fortune 500 is responding to similar situations. You can look at the industry solutions, how the Times top 100 companies are responding. We also rely on our consulting and our core source auditor at my company is Ernst & Young. And we really rely on their partners' knowledge and the way they deal with various different other companies to come up with these emerging solutions. Sometimes, actually, when we did industry research outside of EY, we found that large companies such as Nike, in the midst of very large platform changes, gives a 1 week of a wellness break. So there are insights that you can draw from also the industry. And this is the kind of insight that is rich and meaningful for the C-suite, because it's cut through to the problem to tell them exactly what the heart of the problem in the company is. And that integrated perspective is very important. The final point in C-suite's unspoken expectations is about time and to be precise. Because as you know, most people in the C-suite has very, very limited time. So how do you get that best bang for the buck is something you need to figure out as you go to meet them. And one of the starting points here is to understand how each of the individuals in the C-suite operates and their communication styles. I have varying different individuals in my in the people that I've worked with in the C-suite. Some people are very humanitarian and they want to see, how can we put this across so that the employees benefit. Some people are very aggressive, pace-driven, want to understand the numbers. Some people want the insight, like what is the deepest issue that we have to address that will take off about 10 of our problems. Some people need statistics to prove what we are saying. So there has to be some leeway left to change what you have to say in the way you verbally communicate it, so that each is able to process the information in the way they know. There is no one standard, one size fits all verbal communication method when it comes to C-suite, and you have to figure out that right way. But most importantly, you have to get it very crisply. Long narratives will not do. I've worked with a C-suite individual, his kind of name in the company was Mr. Headlines, because he only worked with like a very summarized information. So it depends on who you work with, but one thing that works for all of them is to be very, very crisp in the messaging and to deliver it in a way that they process information. And the third point here is to ensure that you bring in how this ties to the corporate strategic objectives. Right? So they want the statistics, they want to understand how it goes into the strategic objectives, as well as package it and verbally deliver it in a way that they process information. So these are the few things that will help you navigate the C-suite. And by doing these, it will actually establish value and trust in the internal audit department. So this is one way of navigating value. Okay. All right, moving on. Let's see how internal audit as a function can be value adding. Now, we've spoken about projecting the image of the internal audit to the C-suite so that those who are connecting with the C-suite project a value adding image of the department. Now, let's see, as we embrace the department by itself, how can we do a few things differently to enhance the existing value? So one of the things that should be done is to integrate with internal partners. So this is again is about bringing a lot more, I would say, to synchronize the department with what goes on in the company. Most of the time, what happens is, in particularly large organizations, this may not be true for smaller organizations, is there are disjointed efforts taking place all at the same time, right? So there will be an external audit effort. There will be an internal audit effort. Then there's the enterprise risk management organization. Then there is a data privacy officer. And then there are client audits, and then there are statutory audits. Now, multiple people are looking at risks all at the same time, and no one is talking to each other. So when you take a risk, there are multiple different parties who have drawn different conclusions on the same risk, and neither is speaking the truth of the company, right? So this is not efficient for the company. It's not efficient for its daily operations. So there has to be a better integrated view of the company's risk structure and how you're overcoming. There are a couple of ways to go about accomplishing this. One is to ensure there are periodic meetings between all the risk assessing bodies to ensure that there is mutuality, there's sharing of findings, and there is no overlap, and that you borrow each other's efforts. The second is to also invest on a GRC tool where you have one well-stitched picture of your risk and governance structure. Now, GRC tools are very expensive. At the absence of that, I really recommend a periodic conversation with all the risk management parties. The lesser the risk management parties, the better it is for the company. If there are multiple, then might as well meet at least once a quarter. The second aspect here in how to engage and increase the value of the department is to use dynamic risk identification. This is a new method, and this is far more efficient for the department because you're able to see the risks as they actually emerge. And that gives you a more realistic picture than going about picking samples, because sometimes by the time you pick samples, analyze and report at year end, they have become obsolete, particularly for technology invested companies, because things change very, very quickly. It depends on the pace of the company and the type of the industry the company operates. But dynamic risk identification is more suitable in the pace of the modern world. And you're able to have a more realistic and real-time conversation of what's going on. Real-time audit carries similar concepts, which is the third principle, which actually brings about the audit results right then and there. There's a lot of technology that actually allows you and helps you to have real-time auditing. It's an entire subject by itself, but it is something that you can look at to see if it is worthy of your company to have real-time auditing. You have to go into a technology path of auditing here. You have to have the tools. You have to set what you would like to see out of the technology to rely on those results, but it is really efficient because it dumps what you need once you configure it to say that these are the different risk points, these are the different results we need out of it. And it will keep giving you over a period of time, and you would have well-derived data without too much manual intervention. And the absence of manual intervention actually increases the reliability of the information as well. The fourth is leverage help. I really am a proponent of this because most internal audit departments works in a silo, and the most information and insight they have is what the chief audit executives knows or what the C-suite knows. But there's a wealth of information outside of the department which we may not be connected to. And it's really important to ensure that you at least engage knowledge sharing partners. For this reason, we have a co-source audit. As I mentioned before, we work with EY Bangalore, EY Hyderabad, ensuring that we are well connected to what's happening in similar types of companies. And what are the state-of-the-art solutions out there? What is the research looking like? And I understand some of these engagements can be expensive and not in the budget of the company, but then there should be then industry knowledge sharing sessions between department heads. You can go for low cost options like that, but it's always important to ensure you know what the emerging technologies of the world are so that you can bring better proposals and recommendations for the company, that you know what the research out there looks like, and what similar companies in your space are considering as the state-of-the-art solutions. So always find some kind of help that brings in a different perspective instead of being trapped in your own. And that's a very important point to kind of polish up the department. The next is honing talent. Of course, there are a lot of forums people can participate, such as these. But there has to be a more conscious effort in how you hone talent for the department. So this is when you actually go and connect to your strategic plan, your annual plan, and then you work back to understand what are the skills, the techniques that we are lacking, and what are the inefficiencies that we have. So that you actually build a talent pool every year that matches the direction of the department and thereby the direction of the company's vision. And this has to be an assessment that is performed every year where you ensure that your talent is well aligned. Because if not, people take a lot of arbitrary training. They may be doing CPE events for their own purposes. That's all well and good, and that shouldn't stop. but there has to be more conscious owning of talents to bring in the best of what your efforts are for the department. And that's what it is about here in number 5. Number 6 is celebrate diversity. I'm again a big proponent of cultural mixes and the differences and the strengths they bring. Because each culture is different, each gender brings a different kind of talents, and the more that you bring in the diversity, the more strength you have in a department. When everything is just similar, then even your mistakes are similar. But when you have different strengths kicking in, it's better for you to understand the value that each of these different entities bring into the department. You can do a certain skill or strength or value-based assessments like the VIA Institute's top 5 strengths to figure out what each of your resources bring in that diverse environment and see how you have a failover plan between the different entities or the different individuals in the department. But know that each nationality and culture, the more culturally rich it is, more gender diversity is, the richer the experience and the talents you have. So I would always encourage veering away from always recruiting talent that you're comfortable with, because some people have that sense to do that they want to recruit people that have very similar backgrounds to them, that they are familiar with, or they have studied with, or been in a company that they have worked before, and they always keep that little group together. But that's not bringing a rich experience into your work environment or to your department's function. So I would say be bold and explore differently in the way that you put your talent together. And if you can outsource from a different pool of talent, do that. And the final comment here is benchmark, and this is a very important point. Again, a lot of internal audit departments get lost in their own world and get lost in what the C-suite wants, but never think of actually wondering and taking a step back and saying, okay, are we at par with the industry as a department? Some people actually bring in external parties to come and see if the internal audit function is to mark. That's a big effort and an expensive one too. But the one I recommend here is to have a one-to-one discussion with the similar industry head of internal audit to see what are they doing that you're not doing, and share those notes and do this exercise once in 6 months or once every 12 months so that you actually know where you stand. And I always recommend doing that within a similar industry and outside of the country both, because there's a lot of different perspectives that go into these. And you may catch a lot of more efficient methods, different ways of thinking that you have never thought about. And it brings an entire dimension of innovation. So that's number 7, and that brings me to the end of actually how to enhance the internal audit function. We started with the C-suite. We went into how to enhance your internal audit function. Now let's go into the internal auditor and to see what is the value that needs to be accomplished through the auditor as we navigate value here. So the most important point that comes when it comes to individual resource and augmenting that person's value is to tech-proof the auditor. So this is what modern research has come up with, that the modern internal auditor is neither an accountant or a techie, but something in between that has a very good ability to kind of navigate through technology. Because at the end of the day, everything is becoming very tech oriented, right? Most of the ERP platforms are very large scale solutions that the companies use. In the remote work environment, people are even considering asset as a service, meaning not having laptops that are provided by the company, but getting into signing into a cloud application to get an asset. So tech proofing the auditor right? And having that ease to navigate through this changing technology platform is one of the main individual skills the modern auditor has to have. And the absence of it and the lack of that disparity is going to cause problems. Now, when you look at the statistics based on KPMG research, crisp verbal and written communication still takes 67% of one of the most required skills. And I think that's a lot of mastering, and you have to work on that skill over the course of time. But I want to focus my attention here on the 62%. That's where the tech proofing comes from, because it's very close to the 67 here. This, along with the command of data analytics, understanding emerging trends and global markets, all these three things together is now showing a more offered tech savvy auditor here. And so you can see the importance of not only being skilled, but having a view of what's happening in the world in the technology areas that's becoming important, as you see the 48% here. And that is the part as individual auditors, if you want to stay valuable and relevant, that you need to figure out. So when it comes to technology skills, this is not about going and certifying yourself in 10 different areas saying, you know, I'm CISSP, I'm CISA, I'm this, I'm that. But to have a well-versed pattern of dealing with changing technology, because you will never be able to keep up with the changes that are taking place. But having a good skill set and intrinsic ability to audit technology, be familiar with technology is what is needed here. That becoming tech savvy. And that goes with that 48%, right? Knowing what is happening, what are the current trends in the market. And I would say don't wait for ISACA to bring the current trends into the market, whatnot. Go ahead and get yourself a subscription to the Wall Street Journal or some other really good periodical and understand what is actually happening in the industry. How is the globe going? Not just your industry, not just your country, but how is the globe changing in the way they do business? How are the regulators changing? What are the top 5 trends of technology in the world? And have that view, because that is what will bring that insight as you go through your recommendations and root causes. 39% has come into command of data analytics. And this is also a very important point. To support what you do with your audit, you should always invest in a way of bringing the data out of the company. And like I said, between these 2 buckets, you have to become a tech-proof auditor, regardless of what your background is, whether you come from technical side or whether you come from the accounting side. This is about being a holistic IT auditor, not being an exceptionally kind of a techie, but a holistic view of technology and having the skill and the ability to utilize that technology accordingly. Actually, when you look at the current state of internal audit, and that's what the second half of this slide shows you, internal audit departments are not well proven to be very kind of tech friendly. And one of the things for that is having lower training budgets as well as lower purchase budgets. And that will have to be looked into as you try to polish up each of your auditors. Those go hand in hand. So coming to the end of navigating internal audit and navigating value, we spoke about starting at the C-suite, projecting that value to the C-suite, enhancing your function, and enhancing individual resources to add value. With that being said, we are going to take one step deeper to see what are actually the different technologies out there to help you bring in that lagging technology component, which the statistics show here, to polish up the department further. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Anjana to go ahead and describe those technologies.
Thank you, Sonali. Let me quickly share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? I think I cannot see
Yes,
the
Anjana.
responses.
All
Seeing
good.
it. All right, great. I think a great start, Sonali, and I couldn't agree more on all the important facts that you emphasize on, like, building that next generation of auditors or making them tech savvy, tech proof. I would like to call it future proofing internal audit teams. For me, when it comes to future proofing, just like Sonali explained, yes, there are different technologies, the data and the digital front, which has taken the world in a storm, and we as internal auditors cannot move away or stay away from that. And this impact of using technology, I see it in two forms, which can influence or impact the lives of our internal auditors. One is obviously assisting us to drive our core role as auditors to do assurance, advisory, and also the anticipating risks and advising to senior management on different aspects around this technological adoptions. And on the other side, I think is another key is that driving smarter audits. How can we use this technology to make our lives easier, to make our work more efficient, and our outputs or deliverables are more informative, intuitive, and also adding value to our stakeholders. So I'll take you all through some of the, there are a whole heap of technologies, tools that is in the world right now, but then some of the key ones, which I thought is good to sort of give you an introduction. Some you might have heard most of these by now, but let's go into detail a little bit as an introductory point of view. I think data plays a huge role in our line of work as well as many industries and professions as well. So artificial intelligence is a buzzword that has been making rounds for many years. So all these AI or artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, computer vision, these are all parts of advanced analytics that we can perform to help businesses as well as help our line of work. So if I break it down into different segments, what does artificial intelligence mean? So it means that we are trying to make machines intelligent through analytics and advanced algorithms to think and respond to the scenarios, just mimicking a human behavior, but more on a trained environment based on certain statistics and data. So machine learning, on the other hand, is a subset of artificial intelligence, whereas it's building models, data models, based on the past behavior of transactions or history, and then it builds predictive models based on how it will behave in the future, depending on the past behavior. So for all this, it's using different sources and streams of data, and also a rigorous learning process to make sure that these predictions are accurate and is reliable. Um, Going into another level deeper, which is called deep learning. This is on to moving into using the structured as well as the unstructured data models to create more sort of practical examples of responding, interacting with humans. For example, you all might have dealt with chatbots, where it's real-time responding and sort of giving feedback, giving responses to some of the questions that comes from users who logs into websites and things like that. So this is another form of artificial intelligence being used, which is called deep learning. Structured data meaning is like, a typical like a payables data set, where you would have invoice data, where you would have the date of the invoice, which is sort of the structure is defined and is well known. Whereas unstructured is similar to your emails, your WhatsApp, your tweets, Facebook updates, things like that, which is like, free form text, which can form in any kind of a format, which is not consistent. So deep learning would pull in both and build up models so that it could respond and help us in different implementations within the business. Then looking at computer vision, it cut across, if you can see, as you can see in the diagram, into different verticals depending on the implementation. So here what it does is it allows these models, the mathematical models, help us to sort of identify, recognize, and respond to visuals, like video recordings, pictures, or any of the recording materials, things like that. It can identify what is it about, or what object it is, and what action should be followed suit depending on what is detected through the computer vision. For example, some of the surveillance videos that are being used in my line of work, I'm attached to a ports operating company, so safety is critical. So one of the areas that we use this is the people when they're on the terminal outside. It's always mandatory to have your safety gear on, his safety cap and a jacket. So if anybody is not wearing a safety hat, for example, and is on the field, there are computer programs that we have implemented to detect that and to automatically alert the security teams that there's somebody on the field without a safety hat wearing. So these are some of the things that can be done thanks to the advancement in the data side, things around artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, and also computer vision coming into play. Moving on, this is another interesting technology which is used by many companies currently across the world, which is called RPA, or Robotic Process Automation. Even though we are calling it a robot, it is not a physical robot. So you will not see this. This is a computer software coming into play where which can mimic human behavior, but it has to be role-based or consistent. For example, if you are, let me take an example, like, let's say that you are copying data from one template to another template, which is happening multiple times, but it's the same sequence of steps that you need to follow. So instead of a human sitting and doing it, we could program it in a structured way using RPA software, where it can automatically do it in a much faster pace. And this is like having a virtual staff member who is available 24/7. So from high voluminous and manual based operating environments, this is really value adding. It saves a lot of time. And I'm happy to say that I do have 2 virtual assistants implemented in my team to do certain report consolidations and certain manual work to be done. And it's a huge cost saving. So, for example, a particular report which has taken 3 weeks for 2 resources to do, I'm able to get it done in less than 30 minutes now. So, I mean, when you multiply it by every month and year on year, the cost saving is huge. Moving on. The next technology, which is an interesting one, is called Internet of Things. I don't know whether you all have seen, there were some memes and jokes that used to circulate some time back, saying where your fridge calls you and say that you're out of milk, so you need to reorder, or your washing machine is sending you an email. So it is a reality at the moment. This is about Internet of Things is like physical objects, like different electronic devices, physical objects, which are connected through certain sensors, devices, cameras, where through the IoT network, they can communicate with each other, exchange messages, signals, things like that, in order to make decisions. So there are smart cities in the world which are using IoT's technology in order to monitor traffic, in order to decide on route that one should be taken. Classic example is what is implemented in Spain, in Madrid, for their route planning for their bus transport, the public transport. They do have IoT implemented where, depending on the passengers in different locations of bus stops, they would automatically intelligently decide whether they have to deploy multiple buses, or certain routes has to be cancelled in order to use this transportation effectively. So even in my current organization, on the operational side, we are using IoT technology in order to monitor, because we do get trucks which comes in and go collect containers and move out. So to monitor the traffic any delays, any breakdowns of any of the vehicles, equipment, we are using IoT technology, which has become a very efficient way of doing it. Rather than having physical people monitoring it, this is a more effective way of doing it. Okay, moving on. This is another area which is, I mean, extended reality and virtual reality became very popular in the gaming side. People used to use this to play different games, but this has become a very widely adopted technology in many industries, including mine. Here, what happens is like, you know, where you interact with the physical and a virtual world using wearables or virtual reality, the virtual VR goggles, which can be used for different areas. Like I said, entertainment, for tourism, healthcare, education. I think there are huge advancements using extended reality, where they're using to train people, doctors on certain performing surgeries, emergency services, offline first aid, things like that, for city operations to monitor things, and then for collaborating, like, you know, people from different geographic locations or physical locations, they could join in into a extended reality platform and then sort of interact, work together, or like, you know, sort of perform trainings. These are some of the practical implementations in extended reality. Next, moving on, another popular topic, which has been adopted by many companies again, which is blockchain. This is proven to be, I mean, the standard, if I'm to say the introduction for blockchain, it is actually a shared, immutable ledger that facilitates the process of recording of transactions, these assets in a business network. So this is what you mean by immutable is that each transaction is transferred in a block. And then this block is attached to a chain, because it's linked to, it has a relationship to the block before that and us after that. And nobody can tamper this block. And it is sort of operating in a distributed network. So there's no failure point. If one failure happens, like, still it can continue. And the main thing is the security and the reliability, because nobody could tamper the data, as well as nobody could remove or, like, you know, sort of play around with it. So this is at the moment being recognized as one of the most trusted and a reliable source of communicating across the companies, which is by a thing called a smart contract, which you sign up in order to enable transactions between different business entities. So the next technologies are sort of interlinked or based on the blockchain technology and use of some other technologies coming in. The first one which I want to talk about is metaverse. You all might have heard about the metaverse. A lot of the global companies are moving on to metaverse. This is actually a virtual space. I think before me being exposed to metaverse, my daughter, who is a 12-year-old, was exposed to this metaverse. This is actually a virtual reality, virtual space, where you can sort of carry out transactions using different technologies, such as the 3D virtual spaces linked through virtual reality, blockchain. And then you could have your own virtual space to operate business in. Through blockchain, you could transact with other companies, and then carry out payments, transactions using cryptocurrency. So literally, if you imagine it, it's like a parallel universe, which is going to be present in the digital space. Another key technology where the companies are moving into. Some of these you might wonder, like, how is it going to relate to our line of work? But when the business adopts it, definitely it's good for us to know what these technologies are. So NFTs is a non-fungible token. It's a financial security or a digital asset which you can secure. It's like, let's say, for example, if we are buying a well-known, very expensive painting, where we would have the physical assets with us. But now these assets are moving into the digital space, where it will have a unique identifier and then a registry, where when you procure it, you have the option to sort of own that digital asset and nobody can duplicate it. So there's always be one original. And the beauty of it is the world is moving towards having more than one owner for an NFT, depending on which area of that digital image or asset that you own. And then there would be auctions where you would own part of a digital asset. And there are world banks looking at whether people can be given financial assistance or loans against these digital assets. So it's think of it as like you're having a digital picture, which carries a unique token. So at any given point in time, as long as you own it, it's registered under your name. Nobody else can tamper it or like steal it from you, unless the cyber security side gets so advanced that people would hack in and take over those things. The other thing, which is again critical in terms of dealing on this digital space, we cannot buy things using our own notes and coins. So we need to move into the cryptocurrency. So this is like a digital form of currency, which you would own to transact in this digital world, the metaverse, or transact via blockchain, where you would need to have a critical cryptocurrency and a crypto wallet under your name. So there are certain companies which operate on this space, but it's not as equivalent to a rupee to rupee or a dollar to dollar. The price of these cryptocurrencies vary, and it's highly fluctuating and a volatile market right now. But there's a lot of investment done by different companies to own cryptocurrencies and also to do transactions with the rest of the world using them. And the last one, which I want to talk about, is digital twins. Again, this is a sort of a creation of a virtual representation of a physical object. To simplify things, let me explain. You might have seen that when it comes to certain space explorations, in order to stimulate the environment and to see whether the shape of a particular spacecraft or the speed it should be moving in, there was no way to predict, to real life test it. So this is something that got started in, can we create this digitally on a computer environment and then expose this digital model into the actual conditions of what the physical object would face, and then to predict whether we could sort of do any improvements or like, whether the model would, how successful the model would be or not. So this again is, if you can see, all these technologies are driving us towards a more digitalized world and a digital space where everything is going to operate on there. So digital twin, a classic example is that, again, I'll take an example from my line of work, which is onto ports and terminals. We do have equipment which is specifically to move containers from one place to the other. So there are certain operational maintenance that has to happen for these equipments. And also there's a operational capacity that they can handle. So in order to test them, we use digital twin technology where we predict the age, the wear and tear, things like that is input to a particular mathematical model, and a digital twin is created. So before we actually exhaust the physical objects, we trial it out on the digital space to see whether it works and what are the conditions it should be favorable towards, as well as what are the ones it could break the physical equipment. So these are some of the applications in the digital side of things. Before I go into the next slide, I just wanted to emphasize on why am I letting you know of these digital data and the digital tools. Advisors. As advisors to the management, it's always we have to make sure we are one step ahead from the operations or the management, advising them of what's the future lies depending on the direction the operation is going to take. So we should be aware of what are these technologies are about, what are its capabilities, what are the risks that the operations should be mindful of, so that you could do a proactive role in doing your advisory to business. And the second part, like I said, is driving smarter audits. I just want to give you a very simple example in terms of if you take a typical traditional audit life cycle, where or what we could do to improve the way we work. So some of the things when it comes to risk assessments, we could use analytics and automated risk assessments using artificial intelligence, machine learning. And RPA used methodology processes to fast track and streamline things, make them efficient. When it comes to planning, again, analytics plays a huge role where we could do exploratory analytics, identifying samples and outliers. And from an automation point of view, workflow automations, resource management tools come in handy. Statistical sampling, again, an analytics method to handpick the outliers and samples for further validations. Virtual inspections, we could use drones if it's physical inspections that is involved. Process mining, another analytic method which is on a different stream, which is analyzing efficiency of process operation. Smart working papers, substantive testing, again, analytics. RPA-based automations for report generation. There are a lot of tools available in the market today. Depending on when you key in your audit issue or observation, it automatically generates audit reports. And then for monitoring, issue monitoring and resolution is a key part which eats up a lot of our time. If we can automate it, depending on intelligent agents, where it can follow up with our auditees, that definitely would make our lives easier. Interactive dashboards, if you can visualize, share the stories. That as part of audit, we do have the core audit work, as well as if I take my department, we do have other projects going on to improve things. It can be process implementation, system implementation, where these are some of the things that we could use. Workflow automations, real-time monitoring and reporting, smart screens, some interactive intelligence screens for virtual auditing. We did some virtual audits using smart screens called Microsoft Surface Hubs, where you connect to remote auditees and observe their work and carry out interviews, etc. And different digital applications to make our lives easier. And obviously, collaborative workspaces like SharePoint, team sites, which makes things easier to collaborate, restrict access, and also too easy to track and monitor. So this is from some of the ideas in terms of how you could make it smarter. Another aspect, just before I conclude, what I want to highlight is the world is changing, and the tools and technologies I spoke about today might not be relevant tomorrow. It might be something else. So as auditors, while we are being very strong knowledge, experience, and certifications on the risk governance and control aspect of things, another thing is continuously upskilling ourselves. I think Sonali also touched upon it, on this, what is happening around the world. What are the technologies that there are? What are they doing? What are the capabilities? Because one thing we should be mindful is there's nothing, there won't be a separate area or use cases saying that these are only internal audit use cases when it comes to applying these technologies. So any use case which is happening anywhere in the world can be something that you can learn from. So we'll have to go with that open mindset and hunger for learning about what these tools are capable of, and then also trying to correlate it. How can it help me? Can it change the way I work, or can it help my auditees if I educate them? So this is just an screenshot from that recent competency framework introduced by the Institute of Internal Auditors, highlighting the importance of us as audit team having up-to-date sort of competency skilling on these areas, including the technological aspects. I'll leave my presentation with one last message. I want all of you all to be brilliant in basics. Basics of audit, risk, and governance. That would not change. And that will be the driving force for the work that we do today and tomorrow. But please think differently, because the world is changing. And before we know it, your job might not be the same tomorrow. So we have to be innovative, creative, and create our own luck, how we can take this profession forward and how you can move forward. With that, thank you.
Thank you, Anjana. Thank you, Sonali, for that very interesting presentation. It was brilliant, I must say. And Anjana, that the takeaway message, the fact that you want us to be thorough with our basics, but think forward is a brilliant takeaway, I think. Because if you don't have that, how are we going to build? If you don't have a strong baseline, how are we going to go forward? So that's brilliant. I have a few questions that I'd like to put across to you all. I think the first question was, how can AI be used during internal audit planning and execution? I think Anjana and Sonali, you all have answered that in great detail, so let's not dwell more on that. But I think it's more more on the lines of possibly giving them a summary of what we've been through. So I'll move on to the next question. They've asked us, how could we convince the management to invest in technology for audits? This seems to be the main problem. I know both of you all have answered it in different manners, but I'd like to put it across to you all once more, just to maybe give a summarized version of what we spoke about.
Sure. Do you want to go first, Sonali? I won't mind taking it up. Can you hear me, Nilisha?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, I'll just share my experience in terms of how it was. It's not an easy task, and I think still the world is considering internal auditors to be, police dogs or watchdogs, and sort of do a post-mortem of things. So I guess there's a huge, more than the technical budget, there's a huge impact when it comes to change of mindset. Being that futuristic part of things. So I guess before you talk about the budgets or what technologies to adopt in, one is to change that mindset in terms of how, I think Sonali touched upon in detail, the different strategies we can use. I think for me, the basic turning point is convincing my management that we need to change the way we have been operating. And then the growing demand of the business, and how can we make a proactive assurance rule than being reactive and looking at the history, but instead looking from today to future. And the other thing is you have to be mindful of, the technologies that I spoke about, all of it would not fit into all the businesses, right? You need to be mindful of that and the practicality of things as well. And baby steps. Because don't try to commit to a bigger thing and fail, but instead try to use trial versions to cheaper free software to things like that, where you can prove the value. Because more than the technology or these catchy phrases, it's all about the value we can bring in. And you have to demonstrate it, because it all looks good on business cases. But when you actually practically getting down to it, it's not easy. So go slow, go small, but the more you can demonstrate, I think that will be the turning point. So these are my suggestions.
Let me also add, and I want to reconfirm the question, Nilushi, is it how can we have more technology audits sponsored by management? Is that the question?
In a sense, I guess how can we get them, or how can we get them to invest more on technology when it comes to audit? Okay. So yes,
invest technology. Okay. I think Anjana answered that really well. I thought if I'm to take a different view on that question, because I heard it differently earlier, I thought the question was more on how can we get management to actually sponsor more technology audits. But I think the question was more on how can we get them to invest on technology for the department, correct, Nilushi?
Yes, Sonali. I think more along the lines of how to invest more.
Yeah, so to what Anjana said, it is getting budget for an internal audit department to invest in technology is a far bigger problem than getting the company to invest in technology. And like I said in my statistics, technology absorption is fairly low. And making that pitch is the hardest. And that has been my experience, both with management and sometimes even with your staff. They're resistant to technology changes as well. Anjana made a lot of good points, so I don't want to dwell on this too much so that we have space for other questions. But I think the first point is finding out that one small place, your first step, that brings the biggest efficiency or your biggest bang for the buck, and selling it to your reporting line. And you have to be able to talk through that. And you have to be able to say, this is what we visualize in a year. So this was a question I was asked. What do you think you will get in the first year? What do you think you will get in the second year? In 5 years, will you tell me this is obsolete? Think through those questions, because what management actually wants to know is their investment worthy? At the end of the day, it's a money game. It's not what internal audit has. Right? And what they don't want to know is 2 years down the line, you're going to say, this is not good enough. You want another. Right? But navigate through it in a way that you are able to get the best. And what's, to Anjana's point, what's that first baby step? Don't go and take the most sophisticated technology out there as your starting point if you have 10 people in the team. That really doesn't make sense, and that's not a return on investment either. So you really have to think about what's right for the department, what is it that you're going to derive out of it, and how can you make sense to the person who's budgeting this? Because often time the person who's budgeting this is not going to see it as internal audit. It's not going to see it as technology. He only sees the money and his budget. And where does this fit? Right. So consider all three.
Thank you, Sonali, Anjana. That was a very holistic answer. We looked at it in all aspects. So yes, moving on to the next question. How do you quantify the impact of not implementing the controls suggested by internal auditors to the board of directors? So how do you quantify the impact of not implementing the controls?
That's a good question. And because management has the right to not implement what internal audits say, because they assume that right to accept a risk. But the minute they assume that right, then it is the internal auditor's responsibility to measure it, right? And the question comes here in how do you measure it? And that's where you have to have the statistics and analytics ready. And the point here I want to make is you don't have to wait for the board to ask that. That should be a part of what the work that you do. That's the first step. Because if the statistics are not convincing enough, there has to be a reason, right? So when you go to the board, your first step is to ensure that your audit has the right data to back it up. And let's get a little more technical into audit here. So you can have an observation either as a deficiency in design or an operating effectiveness, right? If it's a deficiency in design that management wants to accept, then you have to have the exposure coverage well measured. Right now, let's say, for example, a company doesn't have a background verification policy. I'm just taking this as a hypothetical example, right? And the management says we don't have to have one, right? Now, how are you going to, even in your audit observation, when you come up with the finding that you have a deficiency in design here because it's absence of a policy, you have to bring context to it. You have to say this is the number of employees the company has, right? This is the number of high-risk areas they go into employing people. These are the high-risk entities we operate in, such as, high fraud risk countries that we operate in. This is our target to go ahead and hire. We have a target of hiring 18,000 people this year. We are operating in, corruption index high, 5 of the corruption index high countries. So this is what the statistics show. That gives you a good coverage of the exposure and a measurement of the exposure. Now, looking at all of these details, plus if there has been fraud and certain other areas of that has come up in misjustifying your qualifications, put that in there as well. Now, when the blatant evidence is there and the company still says, we do not want to go ahead and consider this, then you have to document what is the impact the company is assuming in front of this. This is what could go wrong, right? The third part for it is to understand in detail what the management side of the story is. Is it a point of not having the budget? Is it outside a strategy? Is it outside of goals? So before you take it to the board saying management doesn't want to do this, you really have to understand why management doesn't want to do it and the time frame they don't want to do it, right? So if they don't want to do it in this first 6 months or the next 1 year or never, that's an important measurement to have, because you shouldn't be short-sighted in what management says as well. And in the interim, whether management is willing to have other compensating controls, or is it a complete no? I would say you assess all of these areas before you speak to the board, because sometimes management may have an interim plan or a very good reason for not absorbing it. There's no direct answer for that, but what I'm saying is all the areas you should consider before you speak to the board.
Thanks, Sonali. Anjana, do you have anything more that you'd like to add, or shall we proceed?
I think Sonali addressed it pretty well. I guess we have to have our groundwork ready when you are putting an audit observation, right? We can't just hypothetically put scenarios or sort of imply the risks to the company, right? So all this, I mean, I don't want to reiterate what Sonali said, but she correctly pointed out the different scenarios that you could look into to justify your audit observation, and why is it a risk for the company, and what could be the consequences if it's not mitigated. And then one of the other things that could add in, like a company like mine, which is present in 6 continents in the world and operating in more than 200 locations, the emerging risks which are coming in also adds in another pressure. Political, economical, social, there are different risks which are turbulent, like the situation right now in Sri Lanka. So these are some of the factors that you could factor in onto your assessment or the justification. So you keep it ready with you, because when you have that first discussion with the management, I think you would get a feel or feedback whether they're going to accept it or not before even looking at, like, why we have to go to the board. So that's my take on that.
Thank you, Anjana. Thank you, Sonali. So moving on to the next question. How important is the culture of a I'm sorry, the question's a bit, how important?
I understand the question. I can take the answer for this. So the question, I think, is about how can you audit a culture of the company? Is that how important that the culture of a company is audited, which does not get covered by the audit scope of most of the companies? And I believe the culture sets the tone for all the activities. It's a really good, insightful question, and something I grapple with too, because once I suggest the shabby audit culture, and there's like a lot of kind of discomfort in auditing culture at any given time, I think. So I find this to be a really good question. The culture of a company plays the role and the backdrop for anything and everything you do, right? So how can you audit it? And more so, before auditing it, how can you fit it into your risk plan? Because you can't just draw audits out of the clouds and say, hey, I want to do culture because I see people misbehaving a lot. That's not going to sell, or, people are generally unhappy. But you have to have a way of bringing culture into the bigger picture. And you have to be a good, smart opportunist and a strategist to do that. And that's where culture lies, right? So you have to be very fine-tuned to the changes that takes place in the company. Now, let's say if there's a huge management change, or there's an entire division is there's a divestiture, right? Or there is an acquisition. These are points where you can then happily put culture into your risk equation. There is a huge cultural shift coming on. Now is your ticket to say, that's a good time to audit culture. Right now, a lot of discomfort goes through a lot of seniors when you say you want to audit culture because they're not sure what it's going to derive. And actually, this is an intangible audit too, because you don't know what you're going to get out of it or how you're going to audit an intangible. That's the second part you need to grapple with. And I think if you want to go ahead and audit something like culture, you have to get an expert involved in it. Otherwise, it will be too sensitive, too difficult to navigate because you're dealing with an intangible and you really have to come up with measurements. You can't say we are auditing culture, let's see what happens, see what comes at the end. It's a different audit altogether. You have to decide the parameters that you want to measure on behalf of culture. Is it well-being? Is it control consciousness? Is it, something else? Employee safety, employee health? I don't know. You decide the components of the culture, get involved with an expert and drive a measurement of it. Don't try to do it alone because it will be disastrous. And your credibility in this area is low. Culture is an expert area. So in summary, you have to ensure you have the right time to do culture. Because it's not something that you can wake up one day and say, let's audit culture. There has to be a reason you do it. And when you do it, you have to have the right partners and the right objectives you drive. Objectives should fit into your 5-year plan or 10-year plan so that it's convincing that culture is necessary. Like if you have really high attrition in the company, along with the cultural change, like you actually kind of made a lot of changes in the company, your attrition is hitting in above industry levels. Now is a good time to put it as a risk and get an expert involved. Your investment is justified. And if your 5-year plan says you want to retain resources and grow as a company by a percentage, bam, you have 5 good points. Now you can audit culture.
Thank you, Sonali. That was a very comprehensive answer. We've got a lot of questions coming in, so I'll move on to the next one without further ado. What sort of sites do you recommend to subscribe to get global trends in terms of internal audit? Are there any sites?
That's a tricky one. Just like the technology is evolving, you have so many websites, articles coming in. So and handpicking them is difficult, as well as following them is difficult because so much to read. It's not digestible. But I'll tell you what I do. I have two things. One is I'm heavy on LinkedIn. There are certain prominent figures or like content creators that I follow on LinkedIn, depending on the industry. One is because I'm a strong believer that even though we have to be strong on the technical front, still we need to be strong on the business acumen, as well as what's happening around the business that we are in. So there are certain people in the industry that I follow, certain strategists, and there is I'm sorry, the name doesn't come to me, who is a futurist content creator on LinkedIn. There are a lot of content and LinkedIn trainings created by that gentleman. He's one Jason. Sorry, maybe I'll share it with you all. Or if you follow me on my LinkedIn, he's on mine, where there's a lot of discussion around future of internal audit, what could be the things that could come in or the possibilities. And greatly, I follow on technological sort of advanced people on the analytics side, as well as on different technology sides. So depending on different hashtags, I don't limit myself for only audit, because like I said, there are a lot of things that we can learn from non-audit area when it comes to data and digital side. So that's my strategy. And also I've created few sort of alerts for myself through Google. So I have certain keywords which I set up. So if any article or content gets uploaded, I get an alert. So if it's of interest to me, that, for example, I go for audit, AI, ML, the different keywords that I search for. And then if it's something of interest to me, then I read it. It's a little bit tricky.
To add to what Anjana just said, she sounds very disciplined and I'm very proud of her in the way she's doing this. I feel like I need to get more disciplined. I deeply rely on the Wall Street Journal. I have its subscription. I look at the compliance section, the technology section, and I actually look at the lifestyle section too, because I like to see what lifestyle technology is there as well. There's a lot of things. I mean, I wouldn't say, but I would say your aim should not be to build technology by itself and understand the trends. You should have a perspective of the world to begin with, the world's problems, the world's direction. And that's why I always suggest you go for a broader scheme of things that are outside of your country, such as, whether you look at The Economist or the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or one of the established periodicals to get a global perspective to start with that gives you the trends of how things are done. And you shouldn't look for technology only. You should look at what are the problems that are emerging. And the solutions to these problems often comes in technology, or the regulations comes with technology. So I would say broaden your perspective, broaden your curiosity, and broaden your conversation base. If you talk to your same 10 auditors every day, you're not broadening your conversation base. And go home, come back, audit the same thing and say the same thing all over again, right? What you can also request for is sharing with industry partners. There's nothing stopping from any internal audit department saying, let's get together with 3 other internal audit departments, have a knowledge sharing session once a quarter in, trends and analytics and new things. There's also the possibility of signing a not terribly expensive contract just for industry sharing from the Big Four. If you're not doing consulting and if you have only knowledge sharing, it won't be that expensive. And they have a lot of industry data across the world. And that will give you more pointed data for audit. But I would say always build a global perspective that allows you to move through the industry and be savvy with the industry as well as your audit, as well as the people you engage with. Particularly if you are growing up and want to be a part of, executive leadership.
I think that's a very good point, Sonali. Like, I think building your village, just like we say, like, to raise a child, it takes a village. So to raise you and to raise you to the next level, you have to build your professional village. All the things that Sonali exactly pointed out, you're not bound by the location. Always try to seek out, because now we have enough and more avenues than the time I got started, which was like, only the ISACA and IIA events within Sri Lanka. But now you have a global platforms to interact with people, listen to people. So make use of that and build your village. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Anjana and Sonali. We have a whole heap of questions. So I'm going to stop taking questions from this point on, but I'll take up the questions that they put on the chat for now. All right. My gosh, you two are superstars. There's a whole heap of questions. All right. Isn't it the IT who can recommend advanced technology which best suits the company or industry, not the internal auditor who come from with a financial background, not an IT expert?
I guess
So
adoption for audit, is it?
Repeat
I think
the
in the
question,
sense
if
of,
possible.
yeah, sure. So I think the context of the question is, isn't it better for the IT department to recommend tools instead of internal audit intervening? Because I think in the sense of an internal auditor, he's looking at someone who has a financial background and who doesn't really have that IT know-how.
Right. Okay. I guess maybe this is coming from the fact that I told you about using technology for our advisory role. So I'll tell you the practical example of how we are using it internally. When I first implemented RPA as a tool, but I used that project to upskill our entire department of 34 auditors. So when I say upskill, they're not going to be specialists in implementing or writing scripts. So, but then basic understanding around what this technology is about, what are the advantages and what are the use cases or practical scenarios which it's suitable to implement a technology like that. and then to sort of raise awareness. Because I strongly believe that as internal audit, any internal audit function has a very strong wealth of knowledge of each corner of the operation within your companies, which no other team or department would have. Whether it's the risks, the controls, the people, you have a very thorough knowledge. So this is more of giving an introduction to saying not to implement so and so, such and such technology, but there are technologies such as this available. So it's a consideration. So if implementation has to happen from IT, I strongly agree with that. We're not going to run another IT department. But I guess we like former president of the Institute of Internal Auditors, Richard Chambers, said we are change agents. So I guess we have a bigger role and responsibility to, from a technology side, to drive that. So creating awareness, raising awareness. Sometimes there might be scenarios where certain IT teams not aware of these things. But you do your homework well before you recommend it. But it doesn't mean that you have to be a technical expert, but know those practical use cases. That will definitely help you.
Agree, Anjana. So I just want to make sure the concepts of internal audit are not diluted in the question. And I 100% agree with what Anjana says. As an internal audit department, it is our responsibility to not impede our independence by assuming the function of another department, right? We shouldn't go ahead and recommend or own a single solution for the company. And that's the point Anjana is also making here, right? That independence should be sustained. What you're doing is you're suggesting a problem and some recommendations, right? And you can, to Anjana's point, say this is what the industry is doing, A, B, C, D, E. These are the 5 different technologies. You can consider this, or the IT can come up with something completely different. But at that point, your job is to ensure that whatever IT brings is eliminating your root cause and your risk. That's still your direction. The technology that is suggested is a part of the advisory role, as Anjana said. But we never pin down and say this is a must do. These are what the industry is doing, and we bridge that insight for them. IT department definitely owns the final solution.
Right. Well said. I think Priscilla would, not Priscilla, I'm sorry, Faris would be satisfied with the answer. Okay, we've got 3 more questions. How do we audit environmental and social risk, which needs to be disclosed in financial statements?
Correct. I'll take that because that's the most recent up and coming regulation, the ESG, environmental, social, and governance. Sorry. It's a new area, so I'm not sure if anyone has an outright answer. How will we audit ESG? It is the same techniques that you would audit when a new audit area comes in that you have to do here, right? First of all, you have to understand the regulation that applies to you. The SEC has requested the Securities and Exchange Commission of the US is coming with disclosure statements required for all publicly registered companies for the US in the ESG area. And what is your starting step? I would say understand the regulation first as an auditor, because that's what you need to digest first. What is the regulation calling for? The second step is, I would say, do your research. And see, the point I want to bring here for all internal auditors oftentimes is don't expect to have a prescriptive approach on how to do any audit. You're supposed to have a holistic set of skills to navigate through the unknown, because every time you are in the audit, you are to come across something unknown, because technology changes, regulation changes. So my question back to you is, if I'm giving you an area entirely unknown, how would you audit it? I asked my team that question too, because that's the skill we expect an auditor to have, right? So you start with the regulation first. Then you understand and do your research on what is the world thinking about this, how is it reacting to it, and what are the emerging risks in this field. The third point typically people do when you actually attack a new regulation is work with an expert partner because they have the research, they have the data to kind of strengthen your own program. Now, if you don't have budget to do that, I would say do all of your research and figure out what are the core components of that risk applicable to your organization, because not every regulation in its core is applicable to your organization. But the first two steps, I would say, focus on the regulation, the applicability of your organization, and based on that, do your research. Without these three, even if you go into an expert partner, it doesn't make sense. Anjana, anything you would like to add? Because this is navigating unknown areas, right?
Absolutely. This is very new. Even like, there are discussions within my department also, how are we going to tackle this? From our company, they just issued the first ESG report. But yes, it's an unknown territory, which is, I think, nothing new for internal audit as well, because we are going into unknown territories and coming back and advising the management. So I guess I completely agree with what Sonali said. So go by the regulation. You have something to go by. And then I guess next is in terms of using your judgment as well as experience on how you have tackled other territories. Go step by step. Yeah.
Thanks, Sonali. Thanks, Anjana. Right. Next question by Mr. Ravi Kumar. Hope every audit committee expects to see how many controls internal audit has implemented throughout a period to mitigate inherent and control risks. So how do we report them in a summarized report to the management and audit committee? So I guess looking at all the controls implemented or recommended by internal audit to implement, how do you present all this in a summarized form to the management and audit committee? It's a bit of a tricky question, but I guess
it'll have to be on a summarized form. Sorry, Sonali.
For sure, and I guess we take up we look at the severity of the risk, and then we see as to what controls are to be mitigated based on a priority or something along those lines. I'm thinking that's the question. Sonali, do you have anything to add to that?
I'm actually surprised that an audit committee would go to this level of detail.
The number of controls,
yeah, number of controls seems very unstrategic to me.
Yes.
That was my first thought, which audit committee is asking for this level of, non-strategic detail. Okay. But I think you have to look at the hidden message behind this. The reason they're asking for the number of controls, and let me read the question here. How many controls IA has implemented throughout the period to mitigate the inherent risk and control? Maybe because they don't feel comforted that the work is being done. I think you have to read between the lines here based on the question. People go down to a micromanagement statistic level from the board if they have a level of discomfort, because typically they are not paid for it, nor do they have time for it, right? So that's the first message you should read through the lines and enhance the credibility of the department and your trust relationship with the audit committee. I think that's where the first amount of work has to go. So the other part I want to explain is internal audit is not responsible for implementing controls. It's an independent body who assesses the implementation of management and provides a view of management's function to mitigate the risk. So that's the second example, right? Now, again, reading between the lines here, you would want to take the core areas of your company and talk about the severity of the top, like let's say you choose the top 3 risks that are the deal breakers in your key areas and say this is how management is mitigating the risks. Have management in this meeting, ensure they speak on how they are mitigating the risk and the actions you have to assess whether they are well mitigated or not, whether you have done it or you have a plan to do it. I wouldn't go into, and in summary, you can say this is the number of controls management has implemented in IT, finance, like in summary, 18 controls, 20 controls, altogether, 1,000 controls, whatnot. Give a summary view. But I would say read between the lines of the question and establish a better, trusted, holistic relationship with the audit committee. Because this question shouldn't come up ideally.
I'm just thinking maybe they are looking at an insight in terms of the movement of the risk, let's say, as opposed to the previous year, due to the work by the internal audit, where is the level of risk? The same, the top risk. Are we really looking at, let's say, even 1,000 controls implemented if still the risk level is same? Or is it different? Maybe something like that they're looking at, because that's the comfort we can give them, right? So maybe you summarize in a way, maybe a heat map and the movement of level of risk, and then what contributed to that movement, whether it's going high or low. Really agree with Sonali. We have to read between the lines, because as audit, we don't report the numbers on like, this is the number of controls, things like that. And that's not an assurance also to say that risk is mitigated. Yeah.
I would say strengthen the audit reporting format. To Anjana's point, you also have to map, you have to tell a story. Like your audit committee reporting shouldn't be disjointed. If you go ahead and report certain difficulties, you have to report it up until it disappears or it is rectified. And that trust relationship. And I would say ask upfront from the audit committee, whoever is liaising with the audit committee, what is it that is making them uncomfortable? Is it the function? I mean, both questions has to be asked for you to align to the audit committee too. Is there something that, I mean, you can always ask the question, is there something that we can do to make things better? What are the type of messaging? And every time an audit committee chair turns around, you should have that meeting one-on-one to align yourself to the expectations of the audit committee, because each individual is very different. The way they look at things is very different. And I feel like some of those things may be lagging.
Thanks, Sonali. Thanks, Anjana. I think they were very insightful answers, and we can keep talking about it. So thank you for putting it in a nutshell for all of us to understand. I think Hariharan has another question. So how do we convince the audit committee to go for more advanced technical tools? I believe this was covered during the presentation as well. So I don't want to dwell on it because we've gone over time as well.
Right.
But Sonali, if you could maybe tell us in a nutshell, what do you say, or Sonali or Anjana, what can the internal audit department do to actually convince the audit committee that they should go for advanced technical tools? Because apparently, I think this gentleman here has come across instances where yes, he wanted to go for a certain analytical tool, but it was rejected by the audit committee.
Let me take this question first, Anjana. I want you to weigh in this. Again, I am bothered by the direction between the department and the audit committee in this question as well, right? So I want to read the question a little bit. It says tone of top is very important in the organization to implement the controls, but some audit committee members have enough knowledge about current technology improvement and data. In this case, how to convince to audit committee to go for the advanced technical tools. During the time I was CIA, I introduced this here, but it was rejected. So why is the audit committee even involved in this day-to-day business decisions is the first question. Unless it's a very tiny organization and the audit committee, I don't know the length and the breadth of the organization this is coming from, but typically audit committee shouldn't be involved in day-to-day business decisions, right? And that is the separation you have to make here. So I think Anjana touched upon it. I touched upon it. The technology that a department requires is a discussion between you, your reporting manager, and the person who's financing it. That would be your finance director or your CFO or your controller, right? That's where the conviction should take place. The audit committee's role is to look at the top technical risks for the company and ensure that those are mitigated either through management-sponsored programs or internal audit. And if they have knowledge from their other board meetings, their companies, about how the industry is doing it, they can share the knowledge. But typically, the board approves the budget, not the decision. Right, so their view is fairly strategic, and I am wondering what kind of convincing that you need to do for an audit committee on a day-to-day management. It really shouldn't be that way. So I am sorry, I'm unable to actually understand the question, but I would say look at your lines of reporting and what needs to go to the audit committee and what does not need to go to the audit committee. Anjana, do you have a different perspective here?
I agree with you. I guess I'll just generally touch upon it, irrespective of whether it's for the company operation or for your audit, right? When it comes to we are setting a strategy and then you have an annual plan. If it's not technology, just think of manpower requirements, right? When you're asking for new resources, obviously you would say, this is my plan and strategy, and in order to achieve this is my requirement. And you would say, yes, if so, then I would need an additional headcount. So similarly, if it's coming for any recommendation of wanting technology or wanting to buy a tool, that should not be your marketing pitch or convincing pitch. What are you trying to do? I'm trying to achieve this plan. It got so many audits. And then if I, in order to cut short the time or whatever, depending on the strategy you're trying to drive, try to focus more on the value you're trying to bring in. That might be a sort of a easy discussion to have, rather than going and said, I need this particular tool, which is going to cost ABC. I think this any discussion around this, whether it's for operations or for audit, go by the value you're trying to bring in. What is the impact if you don't have it? Just like how you would convince your auditee why they should implement a control. And what will be the repercussion if you don't have it? So it's a different how do you call it, a path you'll have to take to discuss this. But yes, it's a little not clear. Is it the technology recommendations for the company or for audit? But either of it, you'll have to pitch it in a way that you bring out what you're trying to achieve.
All right. Thank you. I think we've tried to answer that question to the best of our ability. So with that, I think due to us going over time, actually, I think they'll have more than enough questions coming in. But thank you, Anjana and Sonali. I take this opportunity to thank you once again for joining us on this platform. Once again, I think we had Anjana and Sonali here with us a few months ago on another She Lead Tech initiative. So thank you for joining hands with ISACA Sri Lanka chapter. It was a very insightful session. I think the responses are coming in and they're thanking you. It's I don't have to say much. I think the participants are very, very happy with this session. So thank you once again. We'd love to collaborate with the two of you once more for another session. Thank you for those insightful words, for that knowledge. I think we're going back to our workplaces, and we will possibly look at things in a different perspective. I'd like to take what Anjana said once again: stick to your basics, know your basics, but think out of the box. And yeah, you'll definitely thrive. So thank you, Sonali. Thank you, Anjana.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for connecting me as well, and thank you for everybody for participating. Very nice to see this.
It was, I truly enjoyed, as always, listening to Anjana, and thank you, Nelushi, for conducting the session, giving us this opportunity. I thank all of our participants for being engaged in difficult times in Sri Lanka. Your engagement is what made our session very successful today, your interest, your questions, and I truly enjoyed myself as always. It's a pleasure always to present. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
It was our pleasure. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank the audience as well for making this session very colorful. So till we see you all once more, stay safe.
Yes.
Hopefully we'll connect with you all soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.